When the heavily armed Roman vanguard finally entered untamed territory, they did not just arrive to fight, they arrived to initiate a massive construction project. The Roman legionary was equipped for industrial-scale survival. Their lorica hamata, composed of thousands of interlocking iron rings, was heavy, repetitive, and strictly functional. The same principle applied to their headgear. The Montefortino helmet was a stamped piece of oxidized bronze, stripped of ornamentation and optimized for mass production. The Roman Republic expanded across the Mediterranean basin through mathematical logistics, rather than relying on heroic infantry tactics. Their primary instrument for this logistical expansion was the delabra, a dual-purpose entrenching pickaxe designed specifically to move earth. The Roman military operated as a heavily armed civil engineering firm. They neutralized the inherent chaos of warfare by reducing it to rote mechanical labor. The moment the marching column halted, the soldiers immediately transitioned into a coordinated workforce. To map unpredictable frontier topography, they relied on the groma, a surveying instrument with suspended plumb bobs to establish perfectly straight lines and right angles. Planting this single instrument in the soil instantly dictated the exact center of the encampment, designating the precise location for the general's quarters. From that central surveyor's pole, the Romans forced strict geometric order onto the wilderness, projecting a rigid grid over the organic, uneven terrain. Before a single tent was pitched, this invisible grid guaranteed that every man, horse, and supply cart had an exact, unalterable coordinate. By imposing this strict geometry, the Romans stripped their enemies of any natural terrain advantages. They did not adapt to the battlefield, they overrode it. Securing that grid required intense, kinetic physical labor to carve out the camp's perimeter. Excavating a massive defensive ring every single afternoon cost tens of thousands of calories, costing hours of daylight and gallons of sweat from exhausted men who had just marched 15 miles in heavy armor. Traditional Greek armies avoided this exhaustion, choosing to opportunistically use natural terrain, like steep ridges or winding rivers, to save labor and protect their flanks. The ancient geopolitical analyst Polybius documented this baffling Roman inefficiency. Polybius was a Greek historian of the Hellenistic period who wrote a comprehensive account of the rise of the Roman Republic to global dominance. He observed that the Romans accepted the extreme fatigue of daily entrenchment for one specific reason: to guarantee that their camp layout never varied, regardless of the location. This standardized defensive ring required two physical components. The soldiers dug a deep V-shaped trench, the fossa, and piled the excavated dirt inward to create a sheer earthen rampart. The Roman war machine willingly paid a massive, grueling daily tax in physical labor to purchase absolute structural predictability. Looking down from an aerial perspective, the interior logic of these completed earthworks becomes immediately apparent. The camp is bisected by a primary traffic artery, the Via Principalis, which dictates the internal flow of men and material. The space strictly reserved behind this main street houses the command infrastructure, including the tribunes and the general central tent. The lower half of the camp maps out into precise 100-foot square blocks assigned to the enlisted ranks, mirroring the organization of a modern city grid. The veteran infantry, known as the triarii, are positioned immediately adjacent to the central vertical street, establishing a highly trained protective corps right down the middle of the camp. This modularity yielded a massive logistical advantage. A soldier reassigned from a legion in Spain to a legion in Syria could arrive in the dead of night and intuitively know exactly where to find the hospital, the quartermaster, and his own tent. This macro-level standardization of their living quarters perfectly mirrored the micro-level standardization of their weaponry, down to the uniform iron heads of their mass-produced pila, or throwing javelins. This exact military blueprint was a ruthless algorithmic city stamped brutally into the landscape to identical specifications anywhere on Earth. The nightly repetition of this temporary grid left deep topological scars, carving a rigid geometry into the soil of Europe that remains visible millennia later. This aerial image shows the physical footprint of these mathematical camps, surviving today as rigid lines etched into the earth. The distinct cross-shaped foundation in the center proves the headquarters location was strictly adhered to across centuries. Over decades, these temporary timber and dirt outposts calcified into permanent stone logistics hubs. As these military hubs became permanent, they incubated secondary infrastructure. Kilns, granaries, and paved roads radiated outward, cementing Roman economic and military control over the region. Rome structured its empire into existence through the relentless, physical repetition of this grid. When dusk fell and the physical labor of construction ceased, the mechanical protocols of camp security immediately began. An army sleeping in hostile territory is intensely vulnerable. Surviving the night required flawless operational security. The youngest, least experienced soldiers, the velites, were positioned physically outside the camp gates, serving as an expendable early warning system. To mathematically track the night watch, the Romans utilized tesserae. Tesserae are small wooden tablets inscribed with the night's watchword, passed sequentially from man to man to ensure no gap in the security perimeter. If a single node in this system failed, if a tablet did not return, or a guard was found sleeping, the algorithmic consequence was severe and fatal. The offending soldier was publicly beaten to death by his own peers. The camp's true impenetrability came from the uncompromising mechanized discipline operating inside it, systematically eradicating human error from the defense network. Now, consider this imposing structure from the exact perspective of the indigenous enemy, looking from the outside in. An empty field at noon had been terraformed into a fully functioning, impenetrable city by nightfall. This sudden manifestation of order inflicted profound psychological terror. The Roman scutum, their heavy infantry shield, was defensive and protective. Their infrastructure, however, was highly aggressive and entirely offensive. The Polybian grid served a dual function. It provided absolute psychological stability for the exhausted legionary, and it projected an aura of unstoppable inevitability to their adversaries. Rome conquered the Mediterranean world through the cold, relentless application of geometry and the shovel.